Dave is the Bridge Development Engineer for Michigan DOT. He is responsible for engineering and administrative oversight for all aspects of Michigan DOT bridge development, including the Capital Bridge Program, bridge management systems, load rating, and bridge design performed by the department staff and consulting firms. He is a research chair for AASHTO Subcommittee on Bridges, Technical Committee T11. He's a member of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Bridges and Highway Structures and vice chair of the Technical Committee T18 Bridge Management, Evaluation, and Rehabilitation. He is also a member of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Bridges, Technical Committee T8, Movable Bridges. He's a Structural Maintenance Committee, on the Structures Maintenance Committee for TRB Committee AHD 30, and a member of the Federal Highway AASHTO Bridge Preservation Expert Task Group. So if you can please help me welcome Dave.
Boy, you folks put me in a perfect spot. I just love following George because he's always doing some great stuff. And then what's so awesome is Todd Thompson's coming on after me, and I think it's going to fit so perfectly here. My title is Preservation as part of a Bridge Management System. And first, a few BMS questions. You know, what is considered good bridge management? How much money do you need to spend on preservation? How do you prioritize your projects, and is your strategy effective? These are all very important questions to answer because BMS really is a requirement for us today. We have to have credibility both with the folks that give us the money and we have performance measures we have to meet with the FHWA. Well, the reason why I really wanted to talk about this at this conference is that as a member of T18, we're the folks that write the manual for bridge evaluation. I volunteered to update Chapter 3, which is Bridge Management Systems. And some of these things here, I don't know if we have the pointer here, but if you look at the draft table of contents, what we came up with, these are a lot of the things that AASHTO considers good bridge management. And so I'm going to talk about several of these. I mean, of course, you start out with your objectives and your performance measures and collecting your data, and you know we'll talk about some of those. Then your data analysis, which is deterioration, and I know in recent years we've had some really great presentations about deterioration, and we're going to have some good ones today. We've talked about risk assessment, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what you do after you collect all that data, after you do the deterioration rates. And that gets into agency rules, cost-benefit analysis, life cycle cost analysis, and stuff like that. And finally, prioritization. So hopefully, I can do that. Well, and so objectives of a BMS. Okay, meet your strategic objectives by connecting your inventory management and project selection to agency strategic goals through a data-driven process. Okay, you need to meet the needs both of your upper management and where it's a strategic planning tool, and you need to meet the needs of your technical decision makers where it's an engineering tool. BMS strives to find the optimum use of funding by enabling decision makers to understand the essential trade-offs, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit further. And I know you're all familiar with these national performance goals produced by MAP 21. No more than 10% of your bridges that are structurally deficient by deck area. A state shall develop a risk-based asset management plan, and states must maintain their highway infrastructure in a state of good repair. State of good repair, there's been talk about, you know, how that should be defined, but the FHWA Bridge Preservation Guide gives a definition. The existing physical conditions of the bridge elements, components, or entire bridges are such that the bridge is functioning as designed and is sustained through regular maintenance and of preservation and replacement program. And George talked about this flow, and this is a chart that we had come up with AASHTO when we were making some recommendations to the national performance measures, putting these bridges in these categories. Bridges that are good into green. Now, all they need is cyclic maintenance, the washing of the structure, the cleaning out of your downspouts, maybe sealing of some joints and things like that. Things you do on a time-based frequency. And then you get into your fair and you have to do preventive maintenance, condition-based activities to keep it in fair, as George was talking about. And then finally, when it does drop into poor, you're into away from preservation, and now you're into your rehab and replacement. And so we all know about, as part of a BMS, you have your network or program level assessment. And I know all of the states here, you have your charts, and a lot of them are color-coded, and you're monitoring what's good as your definition, or good and fair. You may be forecasting future condition and determining needs. Those are all really great things and definitely part of a good BMS. But again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the stepping it up. And one of the key things is agency rules. So at MDOT, our objective for Michigan DOT bridge management is to deteriorate the network 5 years, because we have a 5-year bridge program. So, what is the condition of all of my bridges going to be in 5 years, both the major components and the elements. For every bridge not programmed, I want to know from my bridge management folks, tell me what the bridge's needs are and provide an estimate of cost for that work. That's where you need to get into the more detailed information. And then what category of work does it fit in? We have a preservation pot of money and we have a rehab replacement pot of money. And with that split up to all 7 of our regions. So agency rules. I'm going to go quick over this one. And, again, there could be cyclic rules, just setting, and you might, and we all want a BMS tool that's going to help us do this. But cyclic rules, okay, you could set that frequency when I'm going to come back to that bridge so you can manage it. And then the conditional rules, as I talked about. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in this next slide. So I want you to imagine a bridge. This is a bridge. Let's say it's a two-span structure, highway structure. If we look at the NBI ratings here, the deck is good. The superstructure is satisfactory, rated 6 on the NBI, and the substructure is poor. And so you can visualize what that structure looks like. Okay, now with the element data, you can get a little bit more detailed. The deck is really quite good here. You can see that, probably about 95% of it is actually good, and a very small percentage even in fair. The steel beams, the entire thing is good. So what was it, painted recently or, something? You go down a little bit, the strip seal expansion joint. Well, in red, that's condition state 4, and that means, it's a high priority for need. So, you have some completely failed expansion joints. But then this bridge is a little unique in that the substructure is poor, and in fact, there's a lot of red condition state 4 with the elements, which it needs has some pretty high priorities, maybe some spalling underneath the expansion joints and stuff. And so that is, and with that, let me ask, how many people are collecting the element level data today? A lot of people. Okay, how many are using it within your bridge management system? Okay, so going to be not quite as many hands, although it is nice to see that there are hands up. And so you're getting into this higher detail of managing those elements. And agency rules within your software tool is what you need for it to do the things that I want it to do, is to tell me when I should work on that bridge. So, for example, you write a rule or an action for that structure that if a certain percentage of your expansion joints are failed, that you replace the expansion joints. But as George was talking about, you can't just look at expansion joints by themselves. You have to look at the other elements too. For example, it wouldn't make any sense for you to replace the expansion joints on a structure that, of course, where the deck's bad, it needs a deck replacement. So those are the rules that you write into your BMS tool to make those proper picks. And as part of your BMS tool, there's different approaches you can take to that. One of the approaches we take in Michigan is a bottom-up. It's an inspector-driven based. It's decisions based upon by the recommendations of the bridge inspector. So they're out there inspecting. So if your BMS tool or your inspection system, I bet you many of you have a way that the inspector can make those recommendations. And for doing preservation, that's a really excellent way to go because they're there, they're seeing the structure, they can use a lot of common sense and say, okay, this is what that bridge needs. That's kind of called a bottom-up approach. Then there's the top-down approach, and that's where you deteriorate the entire network over your program time frame and try to balance the best option for each bridge with the best option for your whole network. It starts increasing or decreasing work on any one bridge in order to make the most progress towards your performance measures. So, okay, the key word there is performance measures. You have performance measures, okay, and then you're working to identify these structures that are going to be the best fit for you to do that. And what do you produce from those types of things? You produce a prioritized list of projects. How many, have some way of producing that prioritized list that you provide? That's actually pretty good. And that is the project level bridge management. And, so at network, I almost look at that kind of more passive, kind of what's happening. This is actually active, telling you what you need to do. And again, a good BMS tool is going to give you those tools to be able to do this type of analysis. And then finally, there's a combination that is starting to be talked about, and that's middle out, where you do a combination of each, and that's probably a really good way to go. So when you're prioritizing, you can be prioritizing the different fixes on a certain bridge, and you can do life cycle analysis to compare, if I'm going to do some just patching of my bridge deck versus an overlay versus a bridge deck replacement. So that's definitely part of a bridge management system, which is tied to preservation. Of course, risk assessment, that's definitely part of bridge preservation. You can have the higher level risk assessment like I show here, which is, we do a risk assessment of our scour critical bridges, rating the criticality of the bridge versus its vulnerability. But George talked about a different type of risk of that element deteriorating because it's not being protected too. So, and then you tie all these things together, and we have a little chapter in chapter 3 just talking, it's going to talk a little bit about multi-objective optimization when you have balancing the needs of your bridges versus your road, preservation versus safety, seismic and scour, modernization. And so we all know that it's just not this simple world. I wish it was, where we can just go out and pick that one bridge. We're little brother to the road program. But that is, what we have included in the updated chapter. And then I do like the very final section we have on that chapter, because, you can get pretty deep into this. I always talk to my bridge management engineer about, getting too far into the weeds with the analytical stuff. But when it comes right down to it, your BMS tool, cannot be used in a vacuum. It has to be used, bridges cannot be managed without practical, experienced, and knowledgeable input from the engineer manager. You have to write these agency rules. You have to be working through it. A BMS is never used in practice to find one best policy among the policy choices. Instead, managers should use the BMS as a tool to evaluate various policies and initiatives, often referred to as what-if analysis. The available choices may relate to network-level decisions or project level. So we talked a little bit about both. Your BMS tool needs to be flexible and responsive for you to be able to do what you feel you need to do. And so that's what we have in chapter 3. This may be coming up to ballot next year. So if there's anything I missed, or anything you like, or anything you'd like to see differently in that chapter, please let me know. And with that, thank you.